I've been many things over the past years, but I've mainly been a blogger since the year 2000, one day in July when I typed blogger.com in my browser. And another thing that's maybe relevant about me is, apart from the fact I have a cat, I'm going to show you the cat because I don't have a presentation, so by fact you have something cute to look at if you get bored when I'm talking. I'm bilingual. I was born in England and my parents moved over to French-speaking Switzerland when I was very little. So I've grown up with two languages, and I think it's important regarding what I want to talk about today. So at the beginning, there was the Big Bang. I hope there aren't too many physicists in the room. And space, time, and matter came to being. And we've heard about this big crunch thing that might arrive at some point. And I think in a way the internet is already part of that, because the internet does one thing very well. It gets rid of space. Okay, with the right URL and a click of a mouse, you can get anybody, anywhere on the internet. So goodbye space. And even though we do perceive the internet as space in a way, because we stay in communities, okay, when we're on the internet. Maybe it's a community revolving around a forum or a chat room or a bunch of blogs, okay? And one thing about these communities is that they have a shared culture which tends to make it a bit, well, it makes it comfortable to stay inside them, and it makes it a bit difficult to get into other ones. One very important element of a community's culture is its language. And we know that very well because in the world there are different countries, cultures, and usually a country has a language. Well, Switzerland is a bit of a weird case because we've got not one but four. And if you add English on top of it, maybe 5 plus, you know, a lot of foreign communities. So we're a multilingual country, so we could ask the question, you know, is Switzerland really a community? Anyway, it's easy to ignore what's going on in other communities on the internet. I think we all know that. Sometimes we're in a little world and things are going on elsewhere and we haven't heard about them. And it's even more easy when the other communities happen in another language, because language is what we need to communicate. So, how do we know what's going on in the other language spheres online? Well, we need to find a way to travel. We can't, on the internet, we can't just do the digital equivalent of, for example, I don't speak Portuguese, but I went to Lisbon last autumn. So I arrived in Lisbon, I walked around, and oh, okay, interesting, and they eat that in the morning, and they've got these shops. I couldn't understand anything that people were saying, but I could walk around and watch. Well, we can't do that online in other language cultures, okay? I could go and walk around in the Russian blogosphere, but it wouldn't help me much. So, just a little question for the audience before I go further. Who speaks or understands more than one language in this room? Okay, nearly everybody. Not surprising, we're in Switzerland, and not surprising, this is, you know, the web world people, so we tend to be a kind of cosmopolitan crowd and with weird backgrounds. So, I think that language is a very important issue online, and there are 2 events which I'll briefly recount, which really made me understand and realize how strong language barriers can be. There aren't any country borders on the internet, but there are language borders. I think those are the only real borders that are there on the internet, and they're really strong ones. So the first event was, I can't remember the date, so I'm not going to give you dates, but quite a few years ago. I don't know if anybody of you, probably many of you have heard about the Web Standards Project. And was it in 2001 or 2002, they launched this browser upgrade campaign, basically saying, stop designing your web pages for Netscape 4, which is a broken browser, start using CSS for layout, and design for good browsers, and encourage your visitors to upgrade their browsers. And, you know, I saw this campaign, I thought, wow, this is really great, and I started really getting into designing with style sheets. And I had a few contacts in the French-speaking blogosphere, and they were looking at what I was doing, and I thought, what is this about? And I tried to explain, and I wanted to show them some resources and articles. And then I realized that these people didn't understand English. Actually, didn't understand enough English to read the article that the Web Standards Project had put out. Oh, okay. So what did I do? I translated the article. I launched a website called bonpage.net, which translated web design articles. That's the first episode. Second episode, which is a bit shorter. Who has heard of Loïc Lemer, the French, rather popular French blogger? Maybe one of the reasons blogs are popular in France, because he did a lot, when he started to be interested in blogging, he did a lot to lots of connections in the media, political world, economical world, etc. But anyway, so this guy was interesting because he had a French blog and an English blog, and in the French blogosphere he was very criticized. French bloggers didn't like him, and the English bloggers seemed to love him. And I thought, what's going on here? It's the same person. And at one point there was a crisis with a blogging platform that he had bought. A really nasty crisis in that community in French. And the English-speaking world knew nothing about it. And had this ideal image of Loïc Lemer as the blogger everybody loves. And I wrote a blog post in English to talk about what was going on in the French-speaking world. And the English were a bit surprised to learn what was going on. So anyway, enough with the stories. I think that these two stories made me realize how important it is to have people acting as bridges. Okay? We don't have a Babel fish yet. We can't understand foreign languages just like that. So we need people acting as bridges. And these people who might act as bridges are multilingual people, people who are comfortable in more than one language. There are various levels of comfort, of course. I've done 9 years of German in school, but I'm not comfortable enough with German to go and read German blogs. I don't read German blogs. I have very little idea of what's going on in the German-speaking blogosphere, but I'm comfortable enough in English and in French to be well-rooted in both. So, a few more questions for you. Who reads blogs in more than one language? Okay. Who blogs in more than one language? Less. Who has different blogs for different languages? Okay. Who has one blog with equivalent content in 2 or more languages? Okay. 2. Who has a kind of mishmash blog which is sometimes in one language, sometimes in the other? Oh. I want to talk with you guys. And who's got the feeling that at times they act like a bridge between different linguistic groups? Okay. All right. So, let me just see what time it is.
So you have to say Swiss German must be treated as a language too.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'd like to do now is just, obviously this is going to be a topic for which, in my opinion, is open to a lot of conversation because there are no perfect solutions and there's still a lot of work to do. So what I'd like to do is, as a biased bilingual person, give you some ideas of strategy. Well, have a look at some of the strategies that people use to act as bridges or to be bloggers in more than one language. and try to have a quick look at, problems, advantages, and I'll touch on some technical issues at the end. Now, you've probably noticed that most blogging tools assume that you're blogging in one language. And most blogging tools assume that the language you're blogging in is not a big issue, because if you look at the markup the blogging tool provides, it might very well provide you markup which says that the content is in English when you're blogging in French or in German. Okay, so, well, there we are. Okay. So strategy number 1 is having 2 separate blogs. That's fine. I think you can even act as a bridge with only one blog. Okay, I can blog in English and speak about what's going on in the French blogosphere. For me, having 2 separate blogs is not exactly something I would classify under multilingual blogging, because it's actually blogging monolingually twice, much more than blogging multilingually. It caters very well to monolingual audiences. That means that your German speakers are happy because they read your German blog, and your English speakers are happy because they read your English blog. That's what Loïc Lemaire was doing. One of the results was a very split perception of who he was. Multilingual audiences, however, might be less happy with this solution, because they've got to follow multiple blogs. So they've got to follow your German blog and your French blog, or your Portuguese blog and your English blog. And they might get the same content twice at times, but not all the time. So most of the time the content's going to be different, but sometimes you might blog about the same thing on both blogs. So it's not necessarily a very nice thing for multilingual people. Then B would be total translation. So we have 2 very courageous people in the audience who do that. I think it is a lot of work. Yes. And I think that one of the reasons blogging works, one of the reasons blogging is popular, is that you've got an idea, you just type, you press publish, and it's there online. No effort, 0 activation energy. And having to translate everything you write kind of totally kills that. So for a blogger who does that, is probably going to end up blogging less than if he was just, blogging in one language. However, it's good for monolingual audiences because they get everything in their language, and it's good for multilingual audiences too, because they know that it's the same thing roughly in both languages, so you can just follow the one you prefer and you're not losing anything. Of course, there are technical issues. If you stick more than one language on a web page, you run into problems, because web pages are usually assumed to be monolingual. If you give Google a page with French and English on it, it's going to have a hard time deciding if it's a French page or an English page. Try to stick it into translator, and you have hell on your hands. Another option would be machine translation. No effort, it takes away the effort of translation, and it does provide translation, but there's a big problem, is that machine translation totally sucks. Totally, I tried to translate some song lyrics. Okay, song lyrics aren't maybe the best example, but it was dreadful. I ended up translating the lyrics myself. So machine translation is too imprecise. We don't want more misunderstandings. We want to understand each other. So that's not a really good solution either. And solution D, which I have to admit is my favorite, as it's the one I've been using for quite a number of years, is to say, okay, I've got one blog. Sometimes I blog in one language, sometimes I blog in the other. So it's really easy for the blogger, who chooses which language to use depending on the mood, the topic, the desire to be a bridge on that particular subject. It's also really good for the correct multilingual audience, people who understand both French and English are quite happy with my blog, because they don't care which language I write in, they can understand it. But then there is the big, big problem of your monolingual audiences. How do you take care of them? Because, I mean, poor people who only understand English, well, who don't understand French, because they might know other languages. Poor people who don't understand French have to wade through French content every now and again on my blog, and they don't understand what it's about, and it's uncomfortable. So I had quite a long thought about that, and I thought, okay, let's imagine if I were reading a blog which was part English, part German, how would I feel about it? German's a language that, you know, I'm not going to read it, unless I have a really good reason to read it. So I thought, okay, maybe one thing that we can do is give readers a short summary of what this post is about in the other language. That's what I've been doing. Because I thought, well, if I've got a blog post in German and I've got a 3 or 4 line summary of what it's about in English, well, that already allows me to judge if it's a topic that interests me or not. Is it about, I don't know, raising hens? I don't have any hens. I'm not particularly interested in hen raising. I'm not going to go through the trouble of wading through German language posts to see what it's about, if I know that it's about hen raising. However, if it's a German language post about, I don't know, the talk I just gave, I might take the trouble, okay? But I have to know that it's worth taking the trouble. Another way to take care of audiences who don't know both languages would be to give them links to equivalent discussions or similar things in the right language, but not on the blog. And again, with the idea of encouraging people to go through the trouble of reading a possibly foreign language, maybe make machine translation available, or a link to machine translation. We know that machine translation is not sufficient, but it can help if you know the other language a bit. And easy writing? No. I know that if I write something in French and I want people who are not comfortable with French to be able to read it, well, I'll be a bit careful about how I'm writing things and be sure to express things in a clear and concise manner. So you might have noticed that during this little discussion I've slipped and started considering people who, not people who don't understand French at all, but people who understand it a little bit and might want to read it or try to read it if it's worth their trouble. But even for people who don't understand French at all, it's less frustrating, I think, because they know what they're missing. Okay, it's a blog post about this. Well, can't read it. But maybe I'll try to grab somebody who, if I'm really motivated, I'll try to grab somebody who understands French and read it. A few other bridging ideas that I'm throwing at you. Translation networks, for example, getting people together that are going to translate, I don't know, a couple of posts a month from other people in the network into another language. That could be an interesting project to try out. Or setting up translating portals. Say, okay, this is news from the world. We are translating into French or English or German or whatever language, blog posts from totally other languages that you might not know. However, I see a problem with this. Bloggers are not translators. Translating is tough work, and it's often not fun. Bloggers are more people who have their own ideas and they like writing them down. They're not going to be very excited about, taking somebody else's post and translating it. They might rewrite it though, which is different from translation. I'm just throwing a bit of stuff at you. On the technical side, a few things that are interesting to take note of if we're thinking of mixing languages. the language attribute. Okay, if you're mixing languages on a web page, it'll be a good thing to use the language attribute in the HTML elements to indicate what is in which language. And then perhaps, maybe one day we'll have tools who actually use these and say, oh, we have French and English content on this page. I don't think that for the moment our tools do this. You can use CSS selectors in the style sheet to make different languages appear in different colors. I used to do that on my blog. I don't anymore because I've become a bit lazy with CSS. But you can have, I don't know, everything that's in French in pink and everything that's in English in blue. Regarding blogging tools, I said blogging tools kind of assume you're blogging in one language. Some of them might let you say, oh, I'm blogging in French. But not many will let you say, this post is in French, this post is in German, this post is in Spanish. Okay, so here's a call to people who are doing blogging tools. There are 2 WordPress plugins, there are more than that, but 2 WordPress plugins which can help. One of them is called Language Picker. The idea is that one post has different equivalents in different languages, so it will help somebody going along the translation path. Another one is the one I use on my blog to manage the summaries, which is Basic Bilingual. If we go the excerpt way, I write a post in English, I write an excerpt in German and an excerpt in French maybe. If I stick that in a feed, Atom or RSS, what status does that excerpt have? Is it part of the post of the entry content? Is it a summary? Does Atom and RSS have tools to handle different languages in a feed? That's it for the technical stuff. Wrap up before I open up the discussion. Most people know more than one language to some extent. A small number of people are really comfortable in more than one language. I think that's a minority. But most people have a little bit of understanding of a language, and if you give them the proper motivation, they might try to understand something which is written in a language which is not comfortable for them. There are multilingual people around who can act as bridges across linguistic communities, but the tools we have do not encourage that. Because I think the tools we have are some characteristics of the internet, for example, a web page is expected to be in one language, encourage us to remain in monolingual silos. And we tend to do it, even if we're multilingual. So, what can be done, what needs to be done? I'm interested in hearing what ideas you have or what experiences you have of how to be an efficient bridge or how to encourage people to act as bridges. There, your turn now. I've spoken enough. Danny.
It may not be the best first question. Because I realize I'm totally spoiled being quite comfortable in 4 different languages. So I wonder how much of a need there is for the bridging of the languages, which bridges the culture, which I think is your example of Lloyd pointed out very clearly. This was not a problem of language, it was a problem of culture. There was something about the culture going on in the French.
It was also a problem of language, because as all this drama was going on in French, the English-speaking bloggers didn't have any access to it.
Yeah, but I don't have the background, but wasn't it more something about the way the Francophones perceived what he was doing than actually what he was doing, because he was doing basically the same thing?
Not quite. Because he arrived in the French-speaking blogosphere, yeah, there is a cultural issue, but because he arrived in the French-speaking blogosphere at a certain moment and played a certain role there, okay, which was more or less appreciated. But the fact is that as all that bit went on in French, the English-speaking audience, which arrived later, did not have access to that history of Leuglamer and blogs.
But is there much of a need for bridging that gap? Is that
I'm not sure I'm answering your question with this, but one thing I often hear is, yeah, but everybody understands English. You should blog in English, and you have a wider audience. And I think that's really not true.
No.
I mean, the man in the street in Lausanne doesn't speak English. He's done it 2 years in school and forgotten all about it because it was 15 years ago. And the people that we are used to hanging around with are the English-speaking crowd. You know, often highly educated, cosmopolitan people who travel around who are into the internet. So I'm not sure in what way you would not see a need for bridges.
Well, I would like to know where it is that those bridges are needed. I guess that's more my question. Where is it that we really need the bridge between the different languages? Because I think blogging in a way at some levels is very local. It's about serving a small community, and that most likely is going to be monolingual.
I think it's also about telling the world what's going on in the small community.
Yeah, I'm from Brazil, and entering a different society, I see the need for bridges. When I come here, because French is kind of close to Portuguese, so I can quite understand what's written, not always what's said, but what's written I can figure it out, as she said. But in the German speaking, I have absolutely no idea. And I live in a country now that speaks German, so I don't have access to it. And I am here to study, to gather professional experience, and I don't have access to half of what happens in the country. And I would like to take whatever is happening here and bring back to my place to make a difference there. So I would be a kind of a bridge between the world in Switzerland and take it to Brazil, but I can't when it's written in Germany. So that's where I see there's a need for a bridge.
That's the kind of answers I'm looking for.
The collective intelligence in the room is much, an experience in the room is much greater than my own. Yes?
But I think this is not a question focused only on blogs. I mean, we have this discussion of everything we're publishing in Switzerland. So there's no really a rule or something which really functions. I mean, it depends who is interested in your stuff. I mean, I have a blog, but I don't think that someone in the English-speaking community is interested in my what I'm writing.
I agree that it's a much wider problem than just blogging, but blogging is a space where we might be able to try stuff, and where things can move pretty fast, and and blogging is very often about the person who is behind the blog, and I have found it not a trivial thing to build an identity as a bilingual person. In my everyday life, it's not very difficult. I have lots of English-speaking friends, I have lots of French-speaking friends. When I chat on the internet, it's not a problem. I chat sometimes in French, sometimes in English, and but for blogging, if I want to do that as I am myself, a person who has 2 languages, there are technical issues, cultural issues. It's not trivial. Yes?
I think it's a discussion about the so-called Röstigraben. There are two parts of Switzerland, and they feel different, and there is a need to work together.
Well, I think that being in Switzerland, this is one of the, I think that we, as Swiss people, we are acutely aware that language is important, and that language is somewhere at the origin of the Röstigraben. Okay, so we might be a population who feels more concerned about these language issues than if we're living in the States, for example. Yes?
I would like these 2 ladies who sit there who say that they are blogging in 2 languages. We are often giving references, and the references, let's say, in German or so. How do you manage then when you make a summary and you say with you're more interested in more information, could go to a source, and then the text is in French and the source will be in German.
Yeah.
How do you solve this problem?
So technically, it's possible to by using CSS. It's possible to indicate. I used to do that at some point. Again, I haven't said it again on my blog since I changed the design. It is possible to have the language code indicated after the link. That means that when you create the link, you add the attribute hreflang, which is the language of the source. And then with the appropriate CSS selector, you generate content which appears after the link and indicates that language. So that can be a way of warning people, of telling them, okay, you're reading a text in French, but if you click on this, you're going to land on something in German. Yes?
I wanted to give an example for this rich functionality of blogs. There is a certain kind of blogs called expat blogs. People living in another country and telling the people at home about their experience. So there's a German in England, there's a French guy in Switzerland, there's an American in Switzerland. A lot of blogs of this are running. I'm running as a blog as a German in Switzerland, and they're all reporting about their experience. And we're all sharing the same problem a little bit, that we can talk in our own language, and a lot of people from other countries read this stuff too. But the question is not only translating. I mean, when you translate it, you lose a lot of this playing with words, there's a lot of irony, and it's nearly impossible. And even if you've got a very good translator, you can forget about it. French people love to play with words, the same thing with English people, and how to translate this. It's always give you just a bad idea of the funny stuff someone wrote, so it's nearly impossible. So everyone sticks to his own language in this community, in these expat blogs.
But to a certain degree, it's possible. But what I realize when in normal daily life is that I feel different when I speak in another language. If I speak Swiss German, I feel totally different if I speak in French, English, Italian, whatever. I'm in a way also a different person. To a certain degree, I feel the culture, and to a certain degree, I don't feel it. You can never really translate, but to a certain degree, you can give an image, your personal experience, your personal feeling about the language, and you can transfer the feeling, content, but not really the reality. You never can. But to a certain degree, yes.
Yeah, I used to feel that way too, but blogging into languages actually helped me to kind of get these two different me's together. So, yeah, in a way, it's not, for me, I'm not two people anymore. It's like when I write in English or speak in English or in German, but I've kind of come together, and now it's just me playing with words. Well, I mean, chemistry, I don't do that much anyway, but it is possible to kind of get it across. You know, this is what German people find funny. This is what English-speaking people find funny.
So you have two blogs.
No.
What's your blog name?
h3plus.de. It's about chemistry, so.
I think one idea was very good. A lot of ideas are good. The idea of finding someone who speaks your language and is able to translate it, that perhaps they're a kind of tandem combination, that two people are blogging and they're translating. As you said, they won't translate, they will rewrite it in another language, but perhaps this is...
Well, rewriting is okay. I don't have a big problem with rewriting.
Yeah.
Especially if it means it gets done and some of it gets across, as opposed to translation which would never get done.
Yeah.
But still remains the issue that bloggers like to write about their stuff.
Yes.
And it's going to be, I think it will take a lot of energy to find people who will commit to doing this kind of thing.
Well, let's say there are two people writing in two different languages, and they are both able to read and translate from another language, but this is a totally different aspect than translating in that language.
Oh yeah.
I mean, most translators work like this. They all translate.
You translate into your mother tongue.
So this is the possibility that two people meet like that, and then they're running two blogs in two different languages.
Yeah.
Last year, I went to the first Barcamp Brazil, and they presented a tool. I wasn't at the talk at the time, but it was exactly this. If I'm not mistaken, it's blogamundo.com, but I'm not sure. That people do exactly this. You find some other person who would like to translate, and then you create a network of blogs in multi-languages. And today is happening the third Blogcamp Brazil in São Paulo, and I'm pretty sure that the same person who talked at that time is there today. So later on, we can even try to talk to them, and I could act as a bridge, because in that case it would be important. Not everybody there speaks English, but...
did the question for you, did Blogamundo seem to be taking off? Did it seem to be a thriving community?
I'm sorry, I didn't see actually. I just remembered, but we can try to talk to them.
You can check online.
Yes.
Yes, Bruno.
There is a question of translating the language, and there is a question of translating the culture.
Yes.
Right. And that's why the issue of translation and having the same post in different languages or two parallel blogs or whatever is only half of the story.
Yes.
The other half is really about, you know, I sit in Iran and I'm writing in English and then trying to translate the cultural and political reality for somebody reading me in another language. And that's nothing really to do with the actual language, it has to do with explaining things in a different way and help people understand a reality and a culture in a different way. And there are many efforts. Actually, I mentioned before when I spoke, Ethan Zuckerman, who is the guy behind the Global Voices Online.org website at Harvard, and he has written an essay about bridge blogging, particularly focusing on his experiences in the last 5 years in Africa and Asia, and Middle East, and how those local blogospheres have their own translators in terms of culture and politics who write in other languages, and you can actually find it online. If you want the link, I can give it to you later. And they actually lists a lot of specific examples, like the ones you mentioned from Latin America too, that have really nothing to do about the language itself. They have to do about translating reality and make it understandable.
Yeah, there is culture as content.
Yeah.
I must say that when I thought about this topic, I was thinking more along the lines of what I'm blogging about my thoughts or my opinions, more than reporting on cultural issues as such, which is already more kind of high-level analysis blogging. Okay, so when I'm talking about my everyday life, for example, or some opinion I have on what somebody else wrote, then the cultural translation is a smaller issue there than the language one.
But you know, when I think of bridging, I think of things like I'm 40 and I don't understand what kids in their 16-year talk about, just because I speak a different language. I need someone to bridge between me and them. You know, get me not only their language but their cultural assumptions behind that language. I think that the Bondi blog is also an example of bridge blogging somehow. Yeah. Not because it bridges different languages, but because it bridges two different social realities.
There are many types of bridge blogging,
yeah, so.
and there are many bridges to many gaps to bridge.
Exactly. Exactly.
Please don't go around destroying bridges.
Exactly.
And you're right. So bridge blogging, I think, is a wider issue, and language is one of the gaps that one can try to bridge.
Exactly.
And the people. Because for bridging a cultural gap, you need to have somebody who understands cultural issues, who can take a few steps backwards, and who can give them back in appropriate words for the person who's receiving them. Whereas for bridging a language gap, you just need somebody who speaks both languages, which is a different requirement. There's room for another question or two. Yes?
Well, we have a problem with the Internet CEO blog, or Internet, a multinational company. And we talked about in which language the CEOs should blog. Of course, we decided English because everybody understands English. I mean, it's much better to speak English with non-English speaking person, native speaking person in the room, by the way. But then we decide, but then you have to be aware that many people don't write very well in English, so it might be a hurdle not to jump into the
You might not be comfortable writing in English and not be eloquent.
So we decided that to start with, everybody should write in his own language. I mean, besides Chinese. But it's I think it's a problem. Maybe it's a question of the issue you are interested in. I mean, you are very much interested in this bridge situation. I never was aware before I listened to you, because it's not a topic for me, an issue. So you will find, as everybody, your community who is interested in such an issue. And I think in science, for instance, it's more a need for such kind of translation or partnerships than in an ordinary political blog I'm writing.
What you said reminded me of something my linguistics teacher told us one day at university. He said that the best solution when you have an audience with a lot of people who don't really have the same mother tongue is everybody speaks in their mother tongue, because that is the language that you are capable of doing the most with. And even if the other person does not understand your mother tongue very well, you can find ways to say things so that you are understood. You have more tools available than if you're blogging in a foreign language. So I think what to say about not making the CEO blog in English if he's not comfortable in English makes perfect sense. And I think that also brings forward the issue of multilingual regarding understanding and producing. And I think when I said many people are multilingual to some extent, I think many people can understand more than one language to some extent, be comfortable producing content in more than one language. That is a different crowd. Yeah, and you're perfectly right that I'm interested in language issues. So
just a last thought. What I see is that I have much more connections to Germany, to Austrian blogs than I have to Welsh, French.
Just like we have more connections to France and Canadian French and Canadian blogs.
This is for me a new idea. I will bring out of this room, because I think the separation in Switzerland is going deeper than the newspapers, because we are more. I do not have the amount of Sisyphus. Is one. It's a Geneva blog. Okay. He's blogging in German, French, German, and English. Okay. So this is my only door to the French speaking. And I visited your blog, of course, but I do not have any access to French blogging people. Yeah. I have access to French-speaking, French-written newspapers or television, and I think this will become maybe a political issue. Like the separation of the two parts will.
I think that on the internet, the only really relevant distinctions are language. Okay, there's culture, but there's Francophonia, there's Anglophonia, and when you read German blogs, whether they're German or Austrian or Swiss German, finally you might not even know. And that finally creates one blogging culture, a German-speaking blogging culture, just like we have a French-speaking blogging culture. But is there Swiss blogging culture?
No, the problem is there isn't even a Swiss nationwide blog index. You have Slug, which is German, you have Bloguge, which is mostly German. And so it's very hard to find blogs from the Romandie in the Swiss blog index. So where should you go? When you check Slug, you see the German blogs, but not the blogs from the Romandie. I think that's a problem too. I think maybe we should start a nationwide blog index so that you learn a little bit from each other.
Given my history with Swiss blog directories, I won't say anything. Is there a last question?
I would just like
Yeah.
to make a remark about tools. That just said you use WordPress plugin, and there's a module for Drupal that tries to make easier to blog in multi-languages, and you set each post in one language, and if you want to translate or not, if you want to detect the language by settings, might worth trying.
So you're saying it exists?
Yes.
Which is the name?
The tool is Drupal.org.
Ah, okay.
And
Yeah.
inside it, there's the module that inside it.
So Drupal knows about languages.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
This is just a good chance to plug the next session.
Go on.
Because I've been working on a solution to this very problem. So if you have a technical interest in multi-language or translated language websites, then I think it's 5.1 after lunch.
And so speaking of lunch, I'm not going to keep you much longer. I'll be there at lunch if everybody wants to. Thank you for your attention.